Hello, continuing on in our applying percents unit. This lesson's on percent equation and percent proportion. So last lesson we talked about percent of an equation. This lesson we're going to talk about when we're given a different number, or we need to find either the part or the whole or the percent, and how we can set it up differently using either a proportion or an equation. So this video is going to show you both methods. You're going to be able to choose which one you like best, or you can kind of toggle between both. So percent proportion is something that you for sure want to have written down, and it compares the part of a quantity to a whole quantity for one ratio and lists the percent as a number over 100 for the other ratio. So when we talk about the percent proportion, we usually say is over of equals percent over 100, which is really we're taking the part over the whole and then the percent over 100, which makes sense because percent is always out of 100. If you want to study this or write this down just to have some examples, you sure can. So when we're given different percent equations, the first thing we want to ask ourselves is, what are we looking for? Are we looking for the part or the whole or the percent? So here's a reminder of the percent proportion. So what percent of $24 is $18? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my proportion. Okay, I'm looking for the percent, so that's going to be my variable, and the percent is always over 100. So that's a pretty easy one to set up. We're either given the percent or we're not given the percent, and then it's always over 100. Then I have to decide what's going to go on the top, what's going to go on the bottom. So the is, which is the part, it goes on the top, and usually the word is attached to the part either before or after, and then usually the of is attached to the whole either before or after. Okay, for this one it makes sense because we're taking the percent of 24, so that's the whole number, and we get 18, so that's the part. Okay, then we're set up with a proportion. So if we think way back to solving proportions, we just solve this like how we normally do. So remember, we multiply the diagonals, we find the ones with the numbers, without the variable, we multiply, and then we divide by the third. So if I do 18 times 100 divided by, 18 times 100 divided by 24, I get x equals 75. Because I was looking for the percent, it would just be 75%. Okay, let's try another one. What number is 60% of 150? So I'm going to set up my proportion. I know one of them is going to be the percent over 100. This time I'm given the percent, so I just drop the percent, put it over 100. Okay, the number I'm left with is of 150. Because the is away from that, and of is right by the 150, I know that that's what I'm taking the percent of, and that's going to go on the bottom, and then my variable is going on the top. So my variable is what I am looking for. Okay, then we solve the proportion. So we do 150 times 60, divide it by 100. And we get x equals 90. And then we ask ourselves, does that make sense? Does it make sense that 60% of 150 is 90? Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, then we have 13 is 26% of what number? So let's set up our percent proportion again. My percent is going to go on this side. I'm given 26%, so that automatically goes over 100. 13 is 26% of what number? So I just always think whatever we're taking the percent of is going to go on the bottom. I don't know what we're taking the percent of in this equation, but I know that when I take 26% of it, I'm going to get 13. Okay, then I solve, and I do 13 times 100, and then I divide by 26. And I get x equals 50. So if I take 26% of 50, I should get 13. And remember our last lesson, we know how to take the percent of a number. We just do 0.26 times 50, and I get 13. Next, we have our percent equation. So this is another method. So make sure you write down percent equation. And our percent equation is part equals percent times the whole. The only thing is that the percent is going to be written as a decimal. So I want you to write a little note here, like a little arrow from the percent, that it is written, maybe percent is written as a decimal. And then we'll do some problems and you'll see what I mean. Okay, here's some other problems if you want to stop and write those down for examples. Okay, so reminder, we have part equals percent times whole. Our part is the is, our whole is the of. 600 is what percent of 750? So the is also what it equals, okay? So in our equation, we always take the percent times the whole. If we think back to our last lesson, remember if we're taking a percent of a number, we always have we change it to a decimal times whatever we're taking the percent of and what we get. So we have 600, that's what it equals, but that's also my is, equals what percent? So that's going to be my variable of, remember, means multiplication, 750. So remember we said is equals. Is the same as equals, of is the same as multiplying, okay? Also, not to confuse you, but then remember that's also the whole. That tells me that's the whole, and that tells me that's the part. Okay, so now we solve. So we can do a two-step or a one-step equation. I want to get my variable alone, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 750. So I do 600 divided by 750, and I get 0.8. The only thing left that we have to do, where it says down here to remind us, remember to write the decimal as a percent in your final answer. So I'm going to flip this around, equals 0.8, and then remember we go 2 to the right to make it a percent. Pop a 0 in there, so we get 80%. So 600 is 80% of 750, and then we can always go back and check to make sure that 80% of 750 equals 600. 45 is 90% of what number? So 45 equals, and it's not always going to be in the order that the problem is. We're just starting out with some basic problems. Is 90%. So we're going to write 90%, but this time we write it as a decimal of what number? We're not sure what number, so times x. This time we're going to multiply both sides by 9/10 or 90 hundredths. That cancels, so we have x equals, and then we do 40 divided by 0.9, and we get 44.4 repeating. So I'm going to flip that around. X equals 44.4 repeating, or we could round it to the nearest tenth and just have it be 44.4. Here's another one that we're going to practice the percent equation. This one's a little, looks a little different. So what number is 30% of 70? We don't know what the number is that we're finding, but remember that tells me that equals 30% of 70, so 0.30 times 70. This looks exactly like how we were finding the percent of a number, which is how it is. It's just showing you that it can be written different ways. So this time I don't even need to solve for I'm going to solve for the variable, but the variable is already alone. So I just do 0.3 times 70, and I get 21. So 21 is 30% of 70. These next three slides have some problems that I would like you to try on your own. So I'm going to have you pause the video, and then when you come back, I'm going to have it shown out with the percent proportion and the percent equation. You can pick which one you like the best. If you're confused, try one right now so that you can see what you don't understand or what you understand, and then go from there. All right, so if you did the percent proportion, this is how I set it up. What percent of 65 is 13? So we're finding the percent of 65. I put that on the bottom. Is 13. I don't know what the percent is, so that's why that's my X. And then what I did was I multiplied diagonally. So 13 times 100 divided by 16, or 65, sorry. And I got 20, and then I just added a percent. So X would be 20%. If you did the I'm just trying to change my highlighter here. If you did the percent equation, we would be, so what percent of 65 is 13? So that's going to be what it equals. And then it would be, so 13 equals, I don't know the percent, and then we're taking of 65. And then I just solved it. I divided both sides by 65. I got X equals 0.20. And then I moved the decimal 2 to the right, and I got 20%. And then lastly, I did a check, and since I got 20%, if I put 20% into there, and I checked that 20% of 65, I wanted to make sure that it equals 13, which is what it told me in the first place, and it did, so it works. Okay, here's your next problem. Do percent proportion or percent equation. Pause me, and then come back and check. Okay, for this one, this is how I set up the percent proportion. So what number is, I don't know what my part is. I don't know what the is. I know that the percent is 35, so that's easy. That's going to be over 100. And then the of 22, of is on the bottom. And so then I just multiplied 22 times 35, and then I divided it by 100, and I got 7.7. And then here we had what number is, so that's my X, equals 35%, I change it to a decimal, times the of, which is my 22. So really, what am I taking the percent of? I just had to multiply those two together, and I got 7.7 as well. And here's the last one that I want you to try to do. Use percent proportion or equation, whichever, and then come back and check your work. So what I did for this one, 1% of what number is 7? So 1% is going to go over the 100 because that's my percent. Of what number? So the percent of, so remember, of what number is going to go on the bottom is 7. So that's the part is going to go on the top. And then I multiplied 7 times 100, divided it by 1, and I got X equals 700. If I set it up as a percent equation, 7, so is 7, so 7 equals, and then I take 1%, I write it as a decimal. Remember, I have to go 2 to the left, so it'd be 0.01 times the number I'm taking the percent of, which we don't know, so that's X. Then I just solve it as a one-step equation, divide it by 0.01 on both sides, and I also get X equals 700. Sorry, that's quick. You can pause it at any time or re-listen. And then my last thing, I just wanted to check just to make sure I did it right. Does 1% of 700, because that's what I found. So I put 700 into there. Does it equal 7? And I checked it, and yes, it does. And then one last question. A survey found that 25% of people age 18 to 24 gave up their home phone and only use a cell phone. If 3,264 people only use a cell phone, how many people were surveyed? So this is telling me that 25% of something, some amount of people, equals 3,264. So I'm just going to use this, I'm just going to write this as the percent equation. So I know that that's the same as 0.25 times however many total people equals 3,264. And then I just do my one-step equation, and I can divide both sides by 25 hundredths. And then I should get 13,056 total people. So you could check on your calculator. Pause me and check. And then if I took 25% of this number, I should get 3,264.